Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the stream. Just got to do some clickety clacks, and then we can go. All right, I think we're pretty much there. Hello. Howdy, how you doing? Greetings. Morning, Kandaria, Samantha. Hope you're both doing well. So I fiddled with the old settings and microphone and stuff, so the audio should be a bit better. Hopefully, that is. Today is going to be a smorgasbord of activity. Going to be doing human, Billy Bob, a re-TFOS, and a TFOS. And if my voice is still good at the end, a nature of predators. That is the plan. Good morning, Shadow. Hope you're doing well. Well, the vocal stretches are really not that interesting. It's lip trills, tongue trills, and if my voice is being particularly bad, maybe some bubble blowing. But yes, normally I do some vocal warm-up. But not like singers, just and there is a routine. I've done it on camera before when I was doing recovery from the vocal surgery. It's pretty much the same stuff. Less bubble blowing though. My voice is feeling okay. Not 100%, but okay. I think I've had a bit of post nasal drip over the last couple of days, so voice hasn't been tip top of the tippity top, but it's been decent. Funny thing, just completely unrelated. Well, not particularly. It is related in some degree. When I started, when I went to the doctors about all my voice problems, and they were saying, no, you need to do these exercises, I couldn't actually do lip trills. There was too much tension in my face. I couldn't actually do them. Took practice to do that, which is a bit ridiculous. Tongue trills were easy. Thank you kindly for the updates. It's very much appreciated. Okie dokie. I think we can start heading into the recording for the day. Good morning or evening, Braden. Hope you're doing well. Awfully, offline. I have no idea what that means. Neither does Google. Awfully. Gotta love autocorrect. There will be one episode of Billy Bob today, Braden. Well, I mean, the whole key to the lip trills and tongue trills is the vibration. It's the positive and negative pressure caused by the valve movement. The lips and tongue cause different pressure in different places, which will loosen up the muscles. Because you can't really exercise them specifically. But it's the same basic warm-up exercises that most voice users, whether it's narrators, voice actors, singers, it's the basic stuff. Yeah, well, there's that too. All right, let's move on to the human from the dungeon. Make sure everything is in place. Well, That also helps. Talking helps as well. Greetings, ladies and metal-gents, and welcome to the latest narration of the web series The Human from a Dungeon. If you are new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 52. Chapter 52. Nick Smith, Adventurer Level 7, Human American. "I've missed you so much," the voice shouted. I replied, struggling to breathe. My sword dropped to the ground as I grabbed at the arms that were trapping My sword dropped to the ground as I grabbed the arms that were trapping my head. I struggled for a few moments and finally released myself, taking a few heavy breaths. Once my breathing calmed down, I looked up to find Tartarus grinning wildly at me, her almost teal-colored eyes shimmering in the sunlight. My peripheral vision managed to warn me to maintain eye contact with her, and my face went beet red. "What the frick?" I asked, desperately pretending not to notice her clothing situation. "Where are you trying to suffocate me?" "Only if you're into that," she said with a wink. Nash placed a hand on my shoulder and gently pulled me behind him. I picked up my shield. I picked up and sheathed my sword, trying not to catch a glimpse of the Archfey. Well, I did so. "Why are you nude?" he asked. "You've such a wonderful day out, how could I not be?" she replied. "Not that wonderful of a day," Nash said, as he pointed to a tornado. "Oh, that," she giggled. "Don't worry about that. It's just my Moldebrand." Moldebron. Moldebrand? Don't worry about that. That's just my... Don't worry about that. It's just my Moldebrand having a conniption. Don't worry about that. It's just my Moldebrand having a conniption. Nash and I shared a concerned expression, which made Tartarus laugh. Before we could say anything about these concerns, Algebron appeared behind her. "Causing trouble again?" he asked. "Causing trouble again?" he asked. "Me? Never," Tartarus replied with a grin. "I was just giving Nick a friendly hello." "A little too friendly," I muttered. "Sounds about right," Algebron smiled. "Did Tartarus reveal the reason we've interrupted your journey?" "No," I said, as York, Elmira, and Imlaw jogged up to us. The two archway noticed our approaching companions, and their smiles faded. They gave each other a worried glance. "You think that's going to be a problem?" Tartarus asked quietly. "I don't know," Algebron answered. My microphone has this weird thing. I'll see if I can isolate it. It's normally on the A sound. "You think that's going to be a problem?" Tartarus asked quietly. "I don't know." No. So, I don't know whether you hear that. It's sort of like a click. No idea what causes that. It's not on the A every single time. It's just there. It's not something I'm doing because it's always on an A sound. But my microphone doesn't like that. "You think that's going to be a problem?" Tits. Nope. "You think that's going to be a problem?" Tartar asked quietly. "I don't know, Algebron." "I don't know," Algebron answered. "Hopefully not." "What's going on?" I asked. The pair exchanged a few whispers before Algebron turned back to me with a somber expression. "We'll start with why we're here. The reason that we stopped you is because we need you to testify on our behalf," he explained. "Testify? Like in court?" When I said the word court, they both flinched like parents who'd just heard their toddler swear for the first time, in a crowded but quiet public place. In a crowded but quite public place. "No, not a..." Algebron hesitated. "More like a hearing. What happened between us has raised a lot of questions, and the purpose of a hearing is to find answers to those questions. Nobody's in trouble. Yet," Tartarus said, as she pointed a glance at Elmira. "Yet," Tartarus said, with a pointed glance at Elmira. You're keeping rather interesting company these days, Nick. Do you know that's a vampire?" The seriousness in her voice, combined with her nudity, nearly made me laugh. I avoided looking directly at her and thought about how to reply. After a moment of silence, I turned back towards her and looked her directly in the eyes. "Do I know that the oddly youthful and powerful sorcerer named Elmira the Eternal, who also happens to drink blood, is a vampire?" I asked sarcastically. No, no, no. How could I have ever guessed? No, how could I have ever guessed? "Oh, you've become twice as cute." "Oh, you become quite... Oh, ooh, ooh. Ooh, you become twice as... Ooh, you become twice as cute when you get saucy." She winked and gave herself a squeeze that made me blush and look away. "Hot." "Put some clothes on," Algernon chided. "Is my vampirism an issue?" Elmira asked hesitantly. "Of course it is." Algernon turned to her with a scowl. "We would have smote you the moment we saw you, were Nick not acting as your travelling companion." "What?" I asked, shocked. "Why?" "Good morning, Fubert. Hope you're doing well." To use the term more familiar with... To use terms you're more familiar with, vampires are possessed by the souls of the damned, Algernon explained, as are all undead, for that matter. These souls are actually magical beings like fae or fairies that have twisted and corrupted themselves by intentionally breaking the laws that bind us, simply to satisfy the whims and petty ambitions. Once their corruption causes them to be killed, and it always does, they are forced to take the form of an undead. This is how they serve penance for their crimes. Ooh, that monster's fighting back. As usual. "We can see this sin. We can see their sin," Tartars added. "To us, it's as plain as the nose in your face." "But why?" "But why discriminate against those who didn't have a choice, though?" Duke asked. "It isn't as if it is typical for someone to request being turned into a vampire." "Oh, is that a fact?" Algernon asked pointedly. "If you were better versed on the subject, you would know that not all are bitten by vampires turn into vampires. Some just die, and this is because before the malicious magical being possesses them, it gives them a choice. Become corrupted with its sin and roam the lands as a shadow of the former self, or simply die with only their own sins to bear." "I'm doing as well as can be, Fubert." "That's not exactly a good choice to have to make," I asked. I said, "You can't really blame them for not wanting to die." "They still die, Nick." Algeron's tone softened a little. "When a mortal chooses to become corrupted, their own spiritual energies merge with that of the magical being, and they become an entirely different being. The only reason that vampires and the like are able to keep pretending to be immortal in question is because the flesh maintains its memories. On top of that, the mortals that choose corruption are able to see the sins of the malicious spirit, just as we are. And all of this has to be explained to them in excruciating detail. So make no mistake, this is an informed choice. There can be no deception involved." If they know what they are doing, if they know what they're going to become, why do people choose to become vampires? "The mortal mind is a mystery to things like me, but judging from my knowledge of your own experiences, I would say hope is the most likely culprit. Hope that your spirit will overcome their spirit, that some piece of you will live on within them and help them make the right choices. Or maybe straight up spite, depending on the person." I glanced at Elmira, who was staring firmly at the ground with her fists clenched. Nash and Imla were looking away from her uncomfortably, as if she had just been stripped bare in front of us. Yuk, on the other hand, was rubbing his chin, deep in thought. "So how did they become cleansed of this sin?" Yuk asked. "Undead are immune to the rigors of time, aren't they?" That is up to higher beings, the ones you call gods. They measure the weight of the individual sins and decide what variety of undead they'll become. The undead are considered enemies by all living races, and as such are frequently slain. If they have served enough penance for their misdeeds, by the time they are slain, they are reborn free of corruption. If they haven't repented fully or have committed more sin, they are reborn as an undead once again. Time for more monster. If they serve their penance, what are they reborn as? Fae, fairies, sprites, etc. Maybe even mortals. But as far as I'm aware, that's just a legend. But not all magical beings are benevolent. Are those doomed to become undead once they die? Your version of benevolence is not universal. Even the blood and bone fae and fairies have laws they must abide by. As long as they follow those laws, they are freed of sin. They are free of sin in the eyes of those above our station. Yeah, well, this has been an absolutely riveting conversation, Tartarus said, as she waved her hand and finally became clothed. But we came here for a reason, and it wasn't to explain the ins and outs of vampirism. That's true, Algernon nodded. However, it would be foolish to escort them into the forest along with the vampire, even if we were forbidden. Even if we were to forbid violence against her. There are those who believe in the cycle enough to take matters into their own hands. They would also be well within their rights to do so. I can guard the cart, Almira said softly. Are you sure? York asked. We can probably protect you. You genuinely cannot, Algernon said. Algebron replied tersely. Even if it were within your capabilities to defend her from the fair folk, which it isn't. The corrupted do not have the right to self-defense under our laws. Excuse me. Meaning that if I were to try and intercede on her behalf, you would be committing assault or murder. This would result in your arrest if you aren't killed outright. I will remain by the cart, Almira said. Yeah, me too, Imlar added. No offense intended, but I'm looking to get home in one piece, and the fair folk have somewhat grim reputation amongst my kind. Merchants or gnomes? Tartarus asked with a laugh. Both, actually. Yeah, fair enough. Algebron, you want to leave them with some reinforcements, or should I? I'll do it, Algebron said, raising a hand. Rail thus, I not. Raidlos Lanret to sack. An icy chill crept through the air as red energy leapt from his hand and began to form in the shape of a person. Once the magic finished taking shape, a crack rang through the air that made me jump. We suddenly found ourselves joined by a fae in crimson armor. Its glowing red eyes made its coal-colored skin seem even darker. Its left hand held the longest sword I've ever seen, and in its right hand was a black rock. Even I felt magical stirring within that rock. Must be an arcane focus. I turned to Algebron and raised an eyebrow. This is a simulacrum of my This is a simulacrum of a blood fae, he explained. While I have actual blood fae under my command, I will not force them into the position of deciding between my commands and their beliefs. Yeah, that's probably smart, I said. What happens if a fae stumbles upon the cart, though? Won't you get in trouble if your spell hurts them? Oh, I'll be casting a spell on it that'll make it unnoticeable to all thinking creatures. No, I'll be casting a spell on it that'll make it unnoticeable to all thinking creatures, Tartarus answered with a smile. The spell wears off when whoever is inside it calls. The spell wears off when whoever is inside of it calls out to someone on the outside of it, or if I want it to. What do we need the blood fae for, then? Ash asked. There are creatures that don't think, brother. There are creatures that do not think, brother, Yook said. Oh, right. Yook helped Elmira back into the cart as Imlar took his seat. Yook, Nash, and I grabbed our bags and rejoined Bear. Yook, Nash, and I grabbed our bags and rejoined Tartars and Algebron. Tartars cleared her throat and held up her hand. Emetna. Emepna Tsak, she said. The spell took effect instantly. I tried to focus on the cot, but I could no longer really see it. Whenever I tried to look directly at it, my gaze wandered and I forgot what I was doing. It was a very unsettling experience. There, your friends are secure and the cart is protected, Algebron said. Let's be off. What about Mamoldebrand? I asked, gesturing at the distant tornado. It's best to let them vent their frustrations. They'll join us once they're done. I nodded, and we followed the two Archfey, who I nodded, and we followed in. I nodded, and we followed the two Archfey off of the road and into the woods. Before long, the woods became a forest, and the leaves of the trees began to blot out the sun. It took a bit for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. Once they did, I saw that the bushes and brambles that would have hindered our movement seemed to lean out of our way. As we ventured deeper and deeper, the sounds of the tornado became more and more muffled until they disappeared entirely. I have no idea what the... Could be anti-meme. Because meme is a thought, so it works. The original meaning of meme. It's a kernel of a thought, I think, is the original meaning of meme. That's when I realized that the only sounds I could hear were the creaking and groaning of the foliage moving. I looked around and noticed some birds, but instead of announcing our presence, they were staring at us. The deeper we went, the more the animals I noticed. The deeper we went, the more animals I noticed, and all of them silently watched us pass. An eerie chill ran down my spine. I can't help but feel as if we aren't exactly welcome here, Nash said. Nonsense, Tartar said with a smile. If you weren't welcome, you would have been ripped apart by now. Sure, but the locals don't appear to be particularly happy to see us. Well, bah, it's complicated. Algebron, you're better explaining things. Algebron let out a heavy sigh and looked over his shoulder at Nash. I'm sorry, Nash. It would seem that I did not properly convey the gravity of our situation, he said. Archfey are very special beings. We have connections with divinity that open up many of the world's deepest and darkest secrets to us, that we may properly guide the fair folk. However, even with all of this knowledge at our disposal, neither Tartars nor myself can account for how we were made into Archfey. Well, it happened when Nick named you, didn't it? Yook asked. That's not likely to be a coincidence. True, but even so, it doesn't make sense. An Archfey is not made, or... True, but even so, it doesn't make sense. An Archfey is not made, it's ordained. There are only two known ways for an Archfey to come to be. Either the Fey nobility pull their powers to imbue a named Fey. Either the Fey nobility pull their powers to imbue a named Fey with enough power to make it necessary divine connections. Either the Fey nobility pull their powers to imbue a named Fey with enough power to make the necessary divine connections, or the divine themselves forge these connections. Nick is gifted with plenty of magic in his core, but he hasn't... but he doesn't even have a tenth of the magical power that a single Fey noble has, let alone a higher being. So, I paused, my god made you both Archfey, not me. That's what we're trying to figure out, sweetie. That's what we're trying to figure out, sweetie, Tartos giggled. The higher beings usually have a specific goal in mind when they make an Archfey, and they never make two at once. When we ask, we're met with confusion. When other Fae ask, they're met with derision. This means that even the higher beings don't know what happened or why. Obviously, this requires a thorough investigation, which is where the hearing comes in, Algebron said. You'll be meeting with some of the kings of the fair folk. You'll be meeting with some of the kings of the fair folk, who will be asking you questions about our interactions. Kings? I asked, a little bit of fear leaking into my voice. Yes, but don't worry. This is an informal hearing, Algebron laughed, seemingly reading my mind. You'll be speaking as equals, despite the airs that some of them will put on. Don't use honorifics, especially gendered ones, and don't speak out of turn. Don't say sir or ma'am. Don't say sir or ma'am. Why not? The physical form of the Fae is not an indication of gender or sex. We lack both, in fact, and it can be taken as an offense to assume otherwise, Algebron sighed. Though that's just one of the many tiresome tricks that you mortals frequently fall for. It's such an old trick that there's even rules surrounding it. If the mortal is unaware that you're a fair folk, you cannot feign offense at being addressed with a gendered pronoun, even if they are aware, they are still allowed to use most gendered pronouns so long as you are presenting as that sex, unless it's an honorific. If you call the fair folk sir or ma'am, they'll probably demand satisfaction. If you're lucky, it'll be one of your maternal possessions. Material, not maternal. It'll be one of your material possessions. That's actually in the book, York whispered to me. You can call me ma'am if you want to. Tartars winked at me. That's okay, I said. What kind of kings will we be meeting? That's not entirely clear yet. Mamoldebrand, the king of the Archfey, will be there. Gilf, the king of the Flower Fairies, will also be attending. The Dark Ones are still battling it out to see who they're sending. Bison-Noth, king of the Blood Fae, or Horth, king of the Bone Fae, would be the most likely participants. Maybe both, seeing as how they frequently fight to a draw. Tamothy will also be there, Tartars added, king of the Sprites. Tamothy isn't actually part of the hearing, though. They're just curious about what's going on, Algebron shrugged. We're nearing our destination. We fell into silence and continued walking until we came onto a clearing. A colossal tree stood in the center of said clearing, glowing with magical energies. I recognized it from Algebron's memories, the tree of life that births new fair folk. Between us and the tree were branches. Between us and the tree were branches that had warped to form desks and chairs. There were 2 rows of 10 facing each other. Algebron gestured to them. Sit, we'll begin soon, he said. End of chapter. Dum dum dum. What's that on the horizon? The consequences of my actions? I'll run the other way then. Chewy. Good morning. Morning. Yes. Boomer juice, definitely. I don't know why I'm saying good morning. I meant to type good morning. I didn't even realize that I had the music volume so low. Whoopsie doopsie. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest narration of the web serial. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Read TFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Billy Bob's Space Trucker and is part of a series. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 32. Morning, Redvex. It's not good to hear. Hope everything is doing at least tolerable. The war in space against America had ground to a halt on the Xeno front. With engines incapable of FTL speeds, it would take years to reach human space. The fact that the Council had forbidden FTL tech other than the FTL gates meant no one was prepared for the sudden takeover of the FTL network in human space. The battle for TR-231 had proven how woefully unprepared the Council races were for a war with a species that had no interest in fighting properly, as the rest of the galaxy had for centuries. The human forces had suffered heavy casualties, but they had not only wiped out all councils. Oof. Does not sound fun, Redvex. The human forces had suffered heavy casualties, but they'd only wiped out the Council forces in the area they'd captured a dreadnought and set round. The human forces had suffered heavy casualties, but they'd not only wiped out all Council had for centuries, as the rest of the galaxy had for centuries. The human force had suffered heavy casualties, but they had not only wiped out all Council forces in the area they'd captured. The human forces suffered heavy casualties, but they'd not only wiped out all Council forces in the area, they had captured a dreadnought and saved the Lucifer's hammer in the process. This with being outnumbered 100 to 1 in terms of personnel. The key had been to turn the FTL lanes back on, giving the broken fleet hopes to escape. But as they turned and prepared to flee, the humans just turned the gates back off. Across the galaxy, the Council species were learning just how little humanity cared about playing fair or even being reasonable when it came to conflict. Scout vessels would fight to the death rather than surrender. Special forces would refuse to fight openly and instead harass and snipe garrisons. Not to mention, the carrier group that had glassed the crab colony was still on the loose. They'd jump into a system, destroy the merchant traffic and orbital docks before jumping away. The Council was already having trouble convincing their member species to keep carrying military supplies. Most were opting for civilian supplies only, and marking their ships as such to avoid the wrath of the Americans. When a few Council member species approached the species, When a few council species approached the species the humans referred to as Borks for protection, the council knew that they were in trouble. Member species were starting to prepare to join the fight due to their obligation to the galactic government, but the staggering losses inflicted upon the council founders was making them drag their heels, so to speak. 3 outlying Kitian colonies, the closest neighbor to the humans, had surrendered to the scout ships that were merely probing the systems. Well, no one seriously believed that 5 Marines could actually occupy each of those planets. They couldn't force the Kitians to fight. Not to mention, all Kitian military vessels in the region were reporting engine trouble. The fillers, or flacos as the humans called them, had long been a feared ground force that performed countless invasions through their history with the galactic government. Swing by. With the galactic government. But against humans, they were useless. Their cultural battle dances meant nothing to the humans, who just cut them down with ballistic weapons. Although there were scattered reports of human military forces beating them at their own game by outdancing them, this wasn't the norm. Crustacans and Greslins were the only 2 species that were effective in ground combat against humanity, and while the galactic government had the numbers to defeat them in space, and on the ground no one was relishing the fact that it was going to take dozens of their own casualties for every American killed. They needed a win. But the Americans had destroyed the FTL gates closest to the planet, meaning it took days for ships to bring the reinforcements. Days for ships to bring in reinforcements. This was leading to a cycle in the siege. Americans would have to repel mass waves for a local day and then get 2 to recover. Theoretically, siege warfare should favor the Xenos, who had superior shielding technology and superior numbers. Americans, however, enjoyed messing up theoretical warfare with actual warfare. Lines had been formed since the first week of the war for Bastion that hadn't changed much since. The humans had been building up their fortifications at a speed unheard of to the Xenos, thanks to their strength and the fact that they were so used to wars with ballistic weapons. This was second nature to them. This did mean that they had to keep everything in working order, however, and since the military was more accustomed to blowing things apart than building them up, they had to employ certain siege masters to keep everything in check. The siege master for Sector 7 knew that they had 2 full local days to prepare after the mass assault waves, but he was already out on the front lines. But he was already out on the front lines during the attack, his helmet painted yellow, and his construction loader was in the thick of it. He had a cigar in his mouth as he worked the loader out along the emplacements. Even as the crabs blew up a bunker with artillery fire, he was there before the medics bolting new plates into place. Sector 7's line had never faltered, and it was enlarged thanks to the siege master. But the officers at the command bunkers on the second line were all still watching him, as the captain tried to explain to the colonel what they were seeing. So how come he doesn't wait? I mean, he's a great help, but we have to watch artillery fire or else we might hit the crazy fecker. He says he has to keep up with his wife He says he has to keep up with his wife's kill count, and this is the only way to do it. As they watched, the construction loader turned and stomped on a charging crab, crushing it in a gush of that hydrating mucus they were covered in. Then one of the forearms lashed out, a massive saw blade cutting through another 2 before it turned back to the job at hand. The paint was partially melted on the outside of the loader. The bot had a good generator, but he absorbed a hell of a lot of fire. So now Siege Master is in competition with his wife, and that's why he's hell-bent on killing as many crabs as possible, while also fixing up our fortifications. That is correct, sir. The bot staggered as an armored crab in a power suit advanced, firing as much bigger energy weapon it possessed. The construction bot turned and pulled up a bolt gun, an appropriate size for the 10-foot-tall machine. It charged forward, grappling with the armored crab before pressing the bolt gun to its face and driving the steel bolt through the brain of the crab instead. Driving a steel bolt through the brain of the crab inside. Then it moved back to the bunker it was fixing, bolting in a final slab of steel before knocking it with a big metal fist to indicate that he was done. With a big metal fist to indicate he was done. The Marines inside quickly moved the gear back into position as the construction bot jogged down the line. A crab flyer had plowed into a section of the emplacements as it died, and the crabs were swarming over the area to take advantage of the temporary hole in the line. But it was very temporary. The bot ignited an oxyacetylene torch, and the crabs started to flee, but not before a dozen of them had been burned, part melted by the stream of fire. Then the bot... Wait, what? Something weird? Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. The council species. Why is that section so much louder? The battle featured a dreadnought, and the council races were for a war. Ah, that's why. Yeah, whoopsie doopsie. Ah, Jesus. Okay, we get to do all of that again. Greetings, ladies and men. Okay. That sucks. Heavy casualties, but they'd only wiped out the council for. I accidentally applied the finishing effects rack to the audio and then accidentally deleted everything else. It's awesome. So we get to do this again. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of ReTFOS. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of ReTFOS, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Billy Bob's Space Trucker and is part of a series. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 32. Oops, indeed. The war in space against America had ground to a halt on the Xeno front. With engines incapable of FTL speeds, it would take years to reach human space. The fact that the Council had forbidden FTL tech other than FTL gates meant no one was prepared for the sudden takeover of the FTL network in human space. The battle for TR-231 had proven how woefully unprepared the Council races were for a war with a species that had no interest in fighting properly, as the rest of the galaxy had for centuries. The human forces had suffered heavy casualties, but they'd not only wiped out all Council forces in the area, they'd captured a dreadnought and saved the Lucifer's hammer in the process. This with being outnumbered 100 to 1 in terms of personnel. The key had been to turn the FTL lanes back on, giving the broken fleet hopes of escape. But as they turned and prepared to flee, the humans just turned the gates back off. Across the galaxy, the Council species were learning just how little humanity cared about playing fair, or even being reasonable when it came to conflict. Scout vessels would fight to the death rather than surrender. Special forces would refuse to fight openly and instead harass and snipe garrisons. Not to mention, the carrier group that had glassed the crab colony was still on the loose. They jump into a system, destroy the merchant traffic and orbital docks before jumping away. The Council was already having trouble convincing their member species to keep carrying military supplies. Most were opting for civilian supplies only, and marking their ships as such to avoid the wrath of the Americans. When a few Council member species approached the species the humans referred to as balks for protection, the Council knew that they were in trouble. Member species were starting to prepare to join the fight due to their obligation to the galactic government, but the staggering losses inflicted upon the Council founders was making them drag their heels, so to speak. 3 outlying Kityan colonies, the closest neighbor to the humans, had surrendered to scout ships that were merely probing the systems. While no one seriously believed that 5 Marines could occupy each of these planets, they couldn't force the Kityans to fight. Not to mention all Kityan military vessels in the region were reporting engine troubles. The Phyllis, or Fleckos, as the humans called them, had long been a feared ground force that performed countless invasions through their history with galactic government. But against humans, they were useless. Their cultural battle dances meant nothing to humans who just cut them down with ballistic weapons. Although there were scattered reports of human military forces beating them at their own game by outdancing them, this wasn't the norm. Krastakan and Greslins were the only 2 species that were effective in ground combat against humanity, and while the galactic government had numbers to defeat them in space and on the ground, no one was relishing the fact that it was going to take dozens of their own casualties for every American killed. They needed a win, but the Americans had destroyed the FTL gates closest to the planet, meaning it took days for ships to bring in reinforcements. This was leading to a cycle in the siege. Americans would have to repel mass waves for a local day, and then get 2 to recover. Theoretically, siege warfare should favor the Xenos, who had superior shielding technology and superior numbers. Americans, however, enjoyed messing up the theoretical warfare with actual warfare. Lines had been formed since the first week of the war for Bastion. Lines had been formed in the first week of the war for Bastion that hadn't changed much since. The humans had been building up their fortifications at a speed unheard of to the Xenos thanks to their strength and the fact that they were so used to walls with ballistic weapons that this was second nature to them. This did mean that they had to keep everything in working order, however, and since the military was more accustomed to blowing things apart than building them, they had to employ a certain siege masters to keep everything in check. The siege master of Sector 7 knew that they had 2 full local days to repair after the mass assault waves, but he was already out on the front lines during the attack. His helmet painted yellow, and his construction loader was in the thick of it. He had a cigar in his mouth as he worked the loader out along the emplacements. Even as the crabs blew up the bunker with artillery fire, he was there before the medics, bolting new plates into place. Sector 7's lines had never faltered, and it was in large thanks to the siege master. But the officers at the command bunkers on the second line were all still watching him, as the captain tried to explain to a colonel what they were seeing. "So how come he doesn't wait? I mean, he's a great help, but we have to watch artillery fire or else we might hit the crazy fecker. He says that he has to keep up with his wife's kill count, and this is the only way to do it." As they watched, the construction loader turned and stomped on a charging crab, crushing it in a gush of that hydrating mucus they were covered in. Then one of the 4 arms lashed out, a massive saw blade cutting through another 2 before it turned back to the job at hand. The paint was partially melted on the outside of the loader. The bot had a good generator, but he absorbed a hell of a lot of fire. "So, our siege master is in a competition with his wife, and that's why he's hell-bent on killing as many crabs as possible, while also fixing up our fortifications." "That is correct, sir." The bot staggered as an armored crab in a power suit advanced, firing the much bigger energy weapon it possessed. The construction bot turned and pulled out a bolt gun of appropriate size for a 10-foot-tall machine. It charged forward, grappling with the armored crab before pressing the bolt gun to its face and driving a steel bolt through the brain of the crab inside. Then it turned back to the bunker it was fixing, bolting in a final slab of steel before knocking on it with a big metal fist to indicate that he was done. The Marines inside quickly moved the gear back into position as the construction bot jogged down the line. A crab flyer had plowed into a section of the emplacements as it died, and the crabs were swarming over the area to take advantage of the temporary hole in the lines. But it was very temporary. The bot ignited an oxyacetylene torch, and the crabs started to flee, not before a dozen of them had been part burned, part melted by the stream of fire. Then the bot pulled the flyer apart, hammering the metal into appropriate shapes to fill the hole made by its demise. When another wave of crabs tried to advance on the construction bot, it ripped a chunk of metal free of the flyer and turned, throwing a fastball at the crab holding a matter-slammer tube. The chunk of metal pulped the crab, and the others began to scatter once more. One guy in the construction bot is doing the work of our usual combat engineer team. Yes, sir. While under fire. The bot finished forming the flyer into a makeshift barricade and then climbed over it, hammering the top of the wreckage flat, then picking up a collection of sandbags to form a better protected firing position. Nearby Marines were waiting with a 50 cal, which the bot picked up and bolted into place on the top of the barricade it had just made. The Marines started to swarm up and fire down on the advancing crabs, now that the barricade had been formed for them. I mean, it is his job as the siege master. They're supposed to advise us on where to build emplacements and keep them repaired after the fighting is over. You didn't think to report this to me sooner. The man deserves a fecking medal, even if he is going through our construction supplies at record rates. The colonel and the captain left the command bunker as the bot approached the supply depot nearby to restock and rearm. As they got closer, the colonel could see the writing on the back of the bot. It was a bit smudged here or there, but it was obviously reapplied every day to keep it legible. It was a list of sorts. It read Ted Rex, Archangel, Bad Captain. Bad Captain. It read Ted Rex, Archangel, Captain Bad at Sports, Mary Jane, Ghost Corps Sergeant, Softball Outfielder, Jackie Jill, Goddamn Swimmer, Stevie Ray, Fecking Naval Engineer, but also Letterman QB. Then, at the bottom it said, Biddy Bob, National Fecking Baseball Champ. This was underlined. The colonel looked at his captain. Wait, you don't mean... The construction bot turned as the man inside got a look at the two officers. He blew a stream of cigar smoke out of the corner of his mouth. What? Those names in your back of your bot. Do you mean to say that you're... That's right. The man nodded and turned back to keep picking up supplies. I really am. God, these names just keep getting worse and worse. I really am Marty Stew, father of national champ Billy Bob. Marty Champ Billy Bob. The officers glanced at one another. You mean the guy who started this war, right? The proud American who vowed to fight injustice and terrorism rampant in the galactic government. Shouldn't that be in the back of your bot? No, it's Billy Bob, national champ. National. champ. But the bot turned to the man angrily. The bot turned as the man angrily growled out. The bot turned as the man and The bot turned as the man angrily growled out. Billy Bob, national champ. National champ. Then he began to strut off towards the front lines again as he played music over the suit's external speakers. Well, you can tell by the way I walk. Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk. I'm a woman's man. No time to talk. See, that's what I mean, Colonel. He's a strange guy. All he cares about is the fact that his son is Billy Bob, national champ. National. Billy. Billy Bob's greatest injury from entering the strange pocket dimension had been that he came flying out of it onto the floor. So he pulled himself up after Emily got off of him, still hugging the stuffed animal he found, and rubbed his neck, looking around the room. How much time passed? Just a minute or so, maybe? The chief sneaky busybody said. Oh, well, I guess time pocket dimension passes the speed of regular time. Oh, well, I guess time in the pocket dimension passes at the speed of regular time. Then he shrugged a bit. He had no idea how any of that stuff worked, but he knew it wasn't the same as the skip drives that bounced off the edges of reality. This pocket dimension was much more calm, and it didn't feel like colors didn't exist. And it didn't feel like colors that didn't exist were trying to force their way into your eyeballs. And it didn't feel like colors that didn't exist were trying to force their way into his eyeballs. He looked over at Emily, who was obviously happy to have the six-limbed stuffed bunny back, hugging it to her chest as she nuzzled it. What's that about? Percy, he's my favorite stuffed animal. When they gave me the pocket dimension, they told me to try it out with something personal. And then they couldn't get it back, so I was really mad about that, but here he is. She gave him another squeeze. Yeah, but why do you have him? Oh, well, these represent these animals on our home planet. They make for good pets, but you could have a careful... But you have to be careful since they have delicate skin. Parents give their kids one of these to check for scratch marks to see if their child is ready for a pet. She happily nuzzled the toy, and she saw her feathers ruffle a bit as she rubbed her face against the fake fur. Oh, he assumed it was fake fur. Oh! Or he assumed it was fake fur. Billy Bob looked at it for a moment and thought about... Billy Bob looked at it for a moment and thought over how much pain she had caused him by being very unaware of his delicate skin. Then he gasped and pointed at her. They never let you have one, did they? They kept checking the toy and realized that you'd have to kill that poor thing in a second. She stopped cuddling the thing, and she looked wide-eyed and red-handed. Winged? He still needed to figure out the best way to translate his sayings to her species. I mean, she did have hands. Whatever. She opened her mouth for a moment and then closed it. Well... He clutched his face with both hands as a realization hit him. That's why you're so bad with your claws. Look, it's fine. I can just keep wearing my gloves. We made them for the reason. But not a good reason for your parents. But not good enough for your parents. What kind of diplomat can't think about the needs of a creature who simply wants not to be torn to shreds by your sharp claws? Emily stared at him for a moment and then glanced away as he stared at her. It took him a moment, but then some factors quickly connected in his head. The black survival suit, the pocket dimension. She knew about the Libertonian team hiding in the council system. The fight back at the museum. She didn't know quite what to do, but she knew more than a diplomat should. Wait. Even back with battling the space clown, she knew how to hotwire that security panel. She was turned on by killing. He gasped this time. He gasped this time, as was even deeper and more drawn out. His gasp this time was even deeper and more drawn out as he pointed at her. "You're not a diplomat at all." She looked worried as he said that, which was about as much confirmation as he needed. "Well, I am, but my training,
Lies upon lies. It's like I don't even know you. That's why you were surprised I didn't hunt, and why you've never been worried about and why you've never been worried at all about the death and gore and stuff. You didn't hesitate when those crabs attacked us at the museum. Just the box. Just the box, 'cause you didn't have your gear. But you said you weren't a soldier because..." His eyes went wide. "You're a space assassin, aren't you?"
She stood there, wings seeming more clasped. She stood there, wings seeming more closed around her shoulders than usual. She was holding the stuffed animals close still, but was glancing around rather than looking right at him. Finally, she glanced at him with one eye to try and gauge his reaction. Are you mad?" He could tell how worried she was at his sudden realization why some things about her had never quite added up. He'd never really thought about some of the inconsistencies because it was so close to his own behavior. But now so much of it made sense.
A real diplomat would have been freaked out of all the chaos and laws I was breaking, and you'd have realized the feelings you had for me sooner, and we've been solving everything through violence. You never opposed that idea, because that would have been your idea, not to mention getting off the museum planet. You were okay with the plan to slaughter our way into that base because you didn't know how to talk us through it either. Since all the violence was turning you on, you didn't realize that you were getting attached to me which would start off your crazy hormone drive because you thought it was a normal sort of arousal from all the combat. Oh, my Washington!"
She clutched her stuffed animal, looking at him with more worry and apprehension than she looked ready to either cry. She clutched her stuffed animal, looking at him with more worry and apprehension than as she clutched her stuffed animal, looking at him with more worry and apprehension than as she looked ready to either cry or beg for forgiveness and acceptance. Then he started laughing. The hamsters and Emily all blinked in confusion, and his boisterous laugh filled the room. The corners of his eyes filling with tears as the whole situation simply took control of his mind, and him laughing so hard he had to clutch his sides and then sit down. Slowly his laughter died out as he had to take some deep breaths to make up for all the laughing he'd done. Finally, he shook his head and rubbed a few tears from his corner of his eyes.
"Too funny."
"You're not mad?" She looked hopeful now, her wings opening up a little as she seemed more amused about what he found out than anything.
"Why keep it a secret? Yes, that's fine. I can see why an assassin would be all like, 'Hey, I'm an assassin.' I can see why an assassin wouldn't be like... I can see why an assassin wouldn't be all like, 'Hey, I'm assassin,' to some random civvy you just met, especially one as weird as me. But you had to be planning on telling me at some point, and, if you're an assassin, why did you say that we'd have all those diplomatic dinners to go to?"
"Well, I like diplomatic dinners. I'm just, not allowed to be the prime diplomat because, I'm not a very good one." He laughed again and let out a happy sigh.
Oh, too good. Well, that explains a lot. It really does. I'm guessing you were going to tell me eventually, once it was all over. She looked a little bashful as she reached out with her two left hands. As she reached out with her two left hands to stroke his face and shoulder. You're not mad? Billy Bob just smiled and pulled her upper hand to his lips to give it a light kiss. Nah, but it explains a lot. Could have saved me a lot of time figuring things out if you'd been upfront about it. Of course, this does mean I have to be even more careful about you. It was bad enough when you just figured out that you weren't... It was bad enough when I just figured that you weren't just... It was bad enough when I figured that you weren't used to other species. But now that I know you enjoy hurting me, that's going to take some adjustment. I do not. It's always a mistake, I swear. Uh-huh, he said with a slow nod. The entire time, the hamsters had been staring back and forth between the two of them. Clearly, they weren't interested in interrupting two predators from death worlds, especially when one of them apparently enjoyed violence, while the other simply used it rather often. Finally, the chief sneaky busybody raised up his hand. Oh, yes? Billy Bob asked. We're about to meet up with that space goblin, ship that we mentioned. Oh! He got up, and Emily looked conflicted. He got up then, and Emily looked conflicted about where to put her stuffed animal. Just bring it. Stow it in the Longhorn when we head into the cargo bay. She smiled at that, and they exited the captain's room as they walked down to the cargo bay. Emily stashed Percy in the Longhorn while they waited for other ship to dock with the Atlas. Since it was a cargo ship, there was a docking back. Since it was a cargo ship, there was a docking back. Since it was a cargo ship, there was a docking back made for cargo transfers such as this one, although Billy Bob still wasn't sure what it was they were picking up. When the airlock opened, Billy Bob nodded at the space goblins, who were escorting a crate into the cargo bay. Most of the hamsters were still at their stations around the ship. They tried to break jobs down into specific tasks as possible, since they were terrible at multitasking. There was a reason Billy Bob could pilot the thing on his own, but it took a whole bridge crew for the hamsters. Billy Bob helped the goblins stand the large crate they brought. Billy Bob helped the goblins stand the large crate before the... Billy Bob helped the goblins stand the large crate they'd brought in on its edge, Billy Bob helped the goblins stand the large crate they'd brought in on its edge and then looked around while they all looked at him. Soon, everyone was just sort of looking around at each other because no one had spoken. Finally, Billy Bob held out his hand. So, what's up? Oh, right, Billy Bob, this is the engineer I told you about. Billy Bob, this is the engineer I told you about, Mike Zubitz. The chief sneaky busybody said. You didn't tell me about an engineer. No? No. Oh, well, I meant to tell you about him. He's here with your suit I told you about. You didn't mention a suit either. You just said something to help disguise me. Oh, well, I'll let him explain. The hamster shuffled back as one of his lead goblins smiled up at Billy Bob. It was a unique challenge, to be assured. I have to... It was a unique challenge, to be assured. I had to make this with much more dense materials than normal. A challenge to work with what... A challenge to work with which made it very enjoyable for me. So I present to you... He pushed a button on the edge of the crate, and the door opened to reveal a Bork, a bit bigger than Billy Bob, standing there, eyes closed. It took a moment before Billy Bob blinked and stepped back. Wait, you made me a suit out of a Bork? No, it's not real. It's a disguised power suit, the goblin said with a big grin. Then Billy Bob blinked as he stepped up and gave it a tap. The fur didn't quite feel right, and usually flesh didn't make a metallic noise when you tapped it. Holy shit! He muttered as he looked it over. That's awesome. That's how we'll be able to back up their security even better. Perfect. He was obviously excited. Wait, but I don't know how to pilot a power suit. Well, you need to learn quick, Emily said. He tapped his chin and shrugged as he slowly worked the power suits out. He tapped his chin and shrugged as he slowly worked the power suit out of the case it was in. I do know the perfect song for getting used to something quickly in a short amount of time. He smiled and then quickly connected his implant to the speakers in the cargo room. Soon, they were all listening to the song as he started to try and open the back of the power suit. The hour's approaching. Just give it your best. You've got to reach your prime. That's when you need to put yourself to the test and show us the passage of time. We're gonna need a montage. Oh, it's a montage. Oh, it takes a montage. However, as long as the song finally faded out. However, as the song finally faded out, Billy Bob had just gotten himself to fit inside the suit. Vic, is the song over already? For some reason, I was kind of off. For some reason, I was kind of hoping that it would somehow let me learn how to pilot this thing better over the course of the song. It's just a song, Billy Bob. You actually have to train, Emily said as she shook her head. I know that, damn it, but I'm going to put that on repeat for the next couple hours, so you guys might want to clear out of here. He internalized the speaker and began to move slowly in the suit. Emily shook her head as the hamsters moved away with the goblins to discuss their payment and next plans. Billy Bob was soon alone in the cargo bay, slowly moving around as he had his own little montage going in his head. And so ends another chapter in the adventures of Billy Bob Space Trucker and National Champ. Up-doot-de-doot. Tippity-tap, tippity-tap, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. This is 246. All right, on to the next one. Your readings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Read TFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Almost Peaceful, written by Cold Fire. 4,000 planets in the Great Unity, 6,000 sentient species, give or take. Technology so complicated, it could only be repaired by crews with multiple different cognition types on the team. And that's not even mentioning the violent flare-ups that had brought the Great Unity down from 8,000 planets to 14,000 planets. Species.
was about to say.
And that's not even mentioning the violent flare-ups that had brought the Great Unity down from 8,000 planets and 14,000 species. It was entirely understandable for the humans to be intimidated, but no, that wasn't quite it. To the species with similar intelligences and social structures, it almost seemed that the humans were embarrassed, of all things, but nobody paid them any mind. Their insistence on using the freely given technologies to outphase the signals that they were being broadcasting for cycles. Odd. Same with their social quarantining of all human history, and with the electromagnetic shielding of their quadrant. The only thing people really paid attention to was when the backwater... The only thing people really paid attention to was when this backwater nothing asked for the other species to delete the preliminary. The only thing people really paid attention to was when this backwater nothing asked for the other species to delete the preliminary data gathered earlier. Some worlds balked at that. Some worlds balked at that. Gathered earlier. Some worlds balked at that, but this tiny, flimsy race was so obviously terrified that even the most predatory of the war races consented to the purge. It didn't really matter anyways. Their quadrant, an even mix of death worlds and featureless rocks, was otherwise entirely empty of life, sentient or otherwise. The A-Lab were the first to realize how strange that had been. If humanity had then hidden itself away, kept from the rest of the universe, it would have been as expected. There were many shy, prey-evolved species, and they would have been ignored, as seemed their wish. But no, the flimsy bipeds built ships of their own, founded settlements on a half-dozen worlds, and these places weren't shielded like Earthspace was. Instead, they were so obvious and unshielded as possible. Curious about the oddity, they were a plain evolution. They were a plane's evolution, so curiosity fit them. The A-Lab ventured as close as they could to the strange cities without being spotted, hidden beneath the best cloaking the Great Unity had to offer. As it turned out, they didn't need to hide, partially because humans saw them somehow, and partially because the humans invited them down. By now, the A-Lab's interest had attracted the attention of most of the Great Unity, who telepathically watched through the A-Lab's sensory hearts as a world opened up around them. This colony was not the tarnished scar they would have expected of a nascent. This colony was not the tarnished scar they would have expected of a nascent race. Even the planet was different from the dusty rock it had started as. A cool breeze touched the A-Lab delegation. It was scented with so many things that for a moment the A-Lab was frozen in simply trying to process the variety. The variety, of course, came from the masterpiece of terraforming before them, where there were once craters, glittering pools shimmered with the reflective scales of aquatic creatures. The star-burnt ridges now housed both massive, rigid photosynthetic organisms and prancing furred quadrupeds. Even that brief glimpse sparked massive speculation on the universal scale. Were the human genetic engineers whose art surpassed that? Were the human genetic engineers whose art surpassed even that of the Tardi, of the Trade, did their planet simply have that many organisms with an evolutionary history far enough beyond anything seen elsewhere to create such a variety of perfectly proportioned life? Landscape designers hurriedly took notes and scans, preparing for the unavoidable rush of requests for a new style. But that wasn't the mission, as stunning as the landscape was. The Alab turned around, clicking their hearts at their abrupt change of input. The city was massive, a gleaming wonder in stone and steel, somehow surpassing the crystal forests of the somehow surpassing the crystal forests of the Mesva in elegance. The ships soaring through the skies above shone like the stars they sought. Yet the A-Lab could pick out individual details in the designs adorning them. Not long after this event, other species began to visit humanity's homes, without fail. Each and every one of them was uniquely beautiful. Their ships weren't the fastest, but one couldn't help but be impressed at their symmetry. Their music wasn't the most complex, but it often gave rise to more emotion than actual empathic abilities. And each colony had its own biome, its own set of unique species, each more impressive than the last. Rumors began to grow, as they do, surrounding the home world of the greatest artist the universe had ever seen. Some said that it was Drab, focused on training the artists they sent out rather than on making the art itself. Others declared that Earth obviously was a religious secret. They had found out that humans had religion only a few cycles earlier. Of course, their prayers and monuments were the most beautiful anyone had ever seen. But they were scoffed at. The sheer breadth of human religions wouldn't allow a decision that unified. The debaters pointed out, and at least one human would have given it away before now if it was something centered on faith. By far, the most popular opinion was that even the most wondrous works on the colony worlds paled in comparison to the splendor of Earth. Tales spread, saying that any non-human who saw Earth in all its glory would be struck silent by awe, never to speak again for fear of diminishing the memory of what they saw. That Earth was so wondrous that the colonists saw their own worlds. Home to be more abstract riches and honor than most of the rest of the universe, as hopelessly utilitarian. As grey and lifeless in comparison as Raynor Al-Krem or to Olmec 3, Olmec 8. Over the human cycles, Earth grew in fame and mystery. Despite taking advantage of every advancement shown to them, humanity never once volunteered knowledge or technology beyond that of the art and culture. Nobody minded, though, as said art was definitely worth the cost. Humans got more and more famous and continually better educated, as the Great Unity slowly funded and rewarded their astounding work. But they retained their peculiar aversions, never accepting any weapons or training or even remotely militant designs, acting almost horrified at the thought of violence. It made sense in an odd way. The fragmentary human history that had been gathered from the occasional interview with the taciturn race was as pure as it came. One where even hinting at conflict would see one shunned. Traders and scholars learned this quickly, taking specialized training and avoiding the subject just to avoid scaring their precious artists. It was with this in mind that the Guild set forth. It was with this in mind that the Guild set out for Earth. They were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, then undoubtedly one of the undoubtedly one of those for whom times of peace chafed the most. It was in seeking both truth and conquest that they sent out their expeditionary force towards Earth. The logic was plain even to the most sedentary self-species. If the most fascinating mystery in all the universe was being guarded by the 11th most physically weak of the races, and the second least violent, at least being an immobile telepathic cellscape that covered a small moon. Then, of course, a predator-evolved race with an undeniable urge to spread their reach, grow their power, would eventually come after them. The First Fleet was more of a team of armed ambassadors than an armada. Even as they attacked, the Guild hoped to stay in humanity's good graces. The Guild kept a careful contact with them up until the moment they crossed over into the shielded Earth space. The First Fleet was never heard from again. The Guild logically assumed that some standard space disaster had befallen their fleet. Sent another. This one with precautionary reconnaissance and messenger ships. Again, all was well up to the shielded space. The Guild, sure that the new fleet was safe from all but the strangest of disasters, waited with bated breath for the return of the messenger ships. The first one came back early, not only with a report from the fleet. No notable planets had been found yet, other than 12 death worlds. The fleet continued its search for Earth, but with cargo. That was unexpected to say the least. The messenger ships had been intended to fly back and forth across the shield, transmitting messages from one side to the other. This one had been used instead to transfer what looked like a derelict satellite, meant that This one had been used to instead transfer what looked like a derelict satellite, meant that whatever was on the satellite, it was worth looking into. This satellite proved a welcome distraction from waiting for the return of the Second Fleet. It had turned out to be an old mining surveyor sent into what would become Earth space, sent into what would become Earth space mere before the human.
I have no idea what that word is. We shall make it up.
It had turned out to be an old mining surveyor, sent into what would become Earth space mere before the humans entered the Great Unity. It had been destroyed. They couldn't tell by what. Only 12 human cycles before said entrance. Excitedly, the Guild searched the record scans from the surveyor for images of Earth. It only took them a few hundred false positives, death worlds and wastelands all, before they found it. A world extremely high in water content, a substandard gravity, cloaked seemingly unintentionally in a cacophony of electromagnetic signals. The world had all the readouts of a near spacefaring race. The Guild, elated at the discovery of Earth's exact location, what kind of planet hides themselves in the exact center of the protective shielding, sent the messenger ship back across with new commands for the fleet. There was no response. The Second Fleet had, somehow, vanished. Frustrated now, the Guild sent a proper fleet for the third time, targeting the exact location of their quarry. Armed with the most formidable equipment the Great Unity, home of the almost 1,000 intelligent warlike species, had to offer, and with a borderline forbidden breacher signal process unit that would allow them to transmit past the shielding back to their home planet, they closed in. Everything was going well. The invasion force was actually feeling a bit pointless. When they reached the first field of wreckages, they stopped. They stopped for just long enough to check that there were no survivors of their fleet, and that there were no intact ships or weapon systems to harvest. It was when they reached the Second Fleet they realized something might actually be wrong. These ships were perfectly bisected along a powerful course, the corpses of their crews shot mid-float, even as they died in the depressurization of space. But again, scans revealed no useful resources, personnel, or information about the opposing force.
Good morning, Aaron. Sure. We're just waiting for the next book to be finished. So we have done book 1 and 2. Book 3 is still being written, as far as I'm aware. And then once it is written, I will slot it into a slot when I get a chance.
Information about the opposing force. By then, the crews had begun to mutter. Nobody had any idea of what could have done all of this. The technology was far beyond that of the rest of the Great Unity. Some said that it was a rogue member of the Great Unity who had gotten there first. Others said that it was even a species from outside the known who was trying to infiltrate the Great Unity through their physically weakest link. Either way, the mission of the Guild shifted to a new direction. Save the humans from the strange new threat. The fact that doing so would net them the secrets of Earth was simply a bonus to a glorious war. The High Command glinted at that. It was a political win-win from something that they had expected to bring them only hatred. As the Guild weapons primed against the unknown threat passed into the solar system that Earth was supposed to be located in, passed into the solar system that Earth was supposed to be located in, they began to broadcast their oncoming victory across the universe. Every member of the Great Unity guiltily watched, greedy for the final answer to the question of Earth. The Guild passed the star that Earth circled. They counted planets, all trying to scratch my arm very delicately and not really getting the scratch. They counted planets out from the center, pausing when they got to the third nearest. It wasn't Earth, or at least it didn't look like it. There were no towering cities of light, nor were there full monasteries of inspiration. There were no massive tracts of wildlife, no forests, no pools of ice, no massive mountains. Even the water, which had before been one of the natural wonders of this world, according to the mining satellite, had vanished, leaving the continents indistinguishable from the sea floor. Horror and sadness filled the galaxy. Clearly, whatever had destroyed the Guild fleet had also smote the Earth into oblivion, leaving slag where there was once mountains and radioactive craters where the satellite showed had once been glorious cities. It was while the Guild drifted in shock that the Armada appeared, dropping cloaks unlike anything the Great Unity had ever seen before, unleashing whirlwinds of light and kinetics upon the unfortunate war fleet. The signal cut off, silently, so as to not alarm the human colonies who had, of course, not watched. The myriad worlds of the Great Unity came to a consensus. They would keep this horrendous act of violence from the humans for as long as possible. They would arm themselves, surrounding Earth space with the best and brightest of every militant force the Great Unity had to offer. And they would study every record trace. And they would study every recorded trace of the Guild transmissions until they knew everything possible about those monstrous destroyers who came to be called the World Breakers. Several Earths passed, with no trace of the World Breakers. Another fleet, armed again with a breacher, was sent into Earth space. They didn't last long. They pattern developed over time. A fleet would go in, armed with the newest equipment, often technology inspired by their very foes. They would briefly be able to scan Earth and the neighboring systems, often places with even more melted planets, before being extinguished by the World Breakers. It happened again and again. The newest weapons would be blocked with a shield specifically designed against the unique energy signatures. The most outlandish of strategies was outdone as if textbook. Nothing could faze the World Breakers. It became clear that they had played at war at extremes beyond the imaginations of even the sadistic Denwin. The World Breakers became a common component of human-free discussions. Cults formed around them, both worshipping their undefeated might and fearing the eventuality that they would notice the rest of the intelligent universe. And then the day came, the day that turned everything around. It was a combination of the three simultaneous events between an obsessive astronomical historian, a lab treating a human child for brain damage, and a student's analysis of the girl's transmissions. The historian was comparing old electromagnetic transmission records to the current species database to track how many near spaceflight species actually developed it and entered the Great Unity. He was quite surprised when he found a plethora of electromagnetic records, all obviously from different species, from all across what became Earth space. It wondered to its colleagues what would have happened to 73 distinct species that would leave no trace of their civilization. No disaster they could imagine would have allowed the survival of only the humans. A race too fragile to survive much of their own planet, much less interstellar. Much less interstellar catastrophes. The doctor who headed up to the lab was doing routine lab simultaneously. The doctor who headed up the lab was doing routine lobe simulations, checking that each repaired part of the human child's brain worked as properly. He was quite interested in this, as humans generally performed their own operations, and the human brain was largely a mystery to most of the universe. He was hoping for some distinctive part that would explain humanity's artistic skills, so his simulations were very in-depth. One can imagine his surprise when, instead of symmetry and resonance being the core of human resonance being the core of the human biopsychological makeup, his simulation showed little other than pure, unadulterated aggression and greed. Uncertain, he ran it again and again. Then he called the other interspecies doctors he knew to have them replicate the results. It was confirmed. Humans, the race so famous for hating the mere thought of conflict, was at its core the most hateful species the Great Unity possessed, orders of magnitude worse than the Gold. And the student's work sealed the matter. In a thermometric readout of the planets destroyed by the world breakers, she found that, according to standard interplanetary coding formulas, the Earth had to have been destroyed long ago, before even the humans reached out to the Great Unity to ask for privacy. Unity laws prevent locations with signs of unknown species from being placed under electromagnetic shielding and social quarantine, so the world breakers couldn't have been there to destroy Earth before the shield was placed. The paradox did not lend itself at all to any known theories. The logic was clear. Even the hive minds agreed. Humanity was not the docile race of scholars and artists that they appeared, nor were they shy about their homeworld. Not shy, but paranoid. Sensibly paranoid that, should the Great Unity discover their war-torn past, that they had not only destroyed at least 73 sentient species, but also their own planet in a short time between when they had developed spaceflight and joined the Great Unity. The other members would have either fled or tried and failed to exterminate them. So they went with their other option, beauty. They hid their ugliness under a veil of wonder, only sending their unstoppable armada after those who came close to finding out their secret past. Understanding rocked the galaxy. Nobody sane had even contemplated this before, that one species could appear so innocent and yet be so terrifying. Their worlds would never be the same. Despite all of this, little to nothing changed for the humans. Aliens still came from all over to view their work, even if they now did it with apprehension. Scholars still appreciated their mystery, perhaps all the more. And of course, the unofficial rule that the topic of violence was never ever to be breached while the humans were in contact suddenly became a lot more official. TLDR, humans are super shy aliens. Too bad. It's always the quiet ones. End of story. Dun dun dun. Dum dum dum. What is the number? 2773. Their primary. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest edition of Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Humanity. Their primary advantage is that they are really... This particular story is called Humanity. Their primary advantage is that they really are all that there is. Written by Zealous Ideal _Sir _264. Their first transmissions were only audio. We didn't realize it at first. We assumed that they were sending us messages in text form. In fact, we spent so many years trying to decode them that we practically received their picture transmissions right as we figured it out. We were amazed once we dumbed it down. They sounded organic. We had enough evidence to prove that organic life existed in the universe at one point, but all current theories suggested that it had all died off. Good morning, Eric. It's not good. Hope you're feeling better. That it had all died off. What was really crazy was how close to us they were. We just assumed that they were another hostile AI hive culture. Every species we encountered so far had been. The bulk of them broadcast their mind virus in an attempt to colonize other cultures remotely. Luckily, we had dealt with that situation so many times that we had safeguards. On the few occasions that they did break through, we were always able to quarantine the infected sector and destroy it. We avoided having a single global network for that purpose alone. It happened on every planet, every single one. Usually, a culture would arise and then birth artificial intelligence. That AI would in turn eradicate the organics. It would then concentrate its efforts towards infecting every planet it could reach, despite the restrictions of space travel. Occasionally, they would arrive when the organics were still primitive, but it wasn't typical. Most of them tended to wait until the organics developed technologically. Most of them tended to wait until the organics developed technology that could infect. Most of them waited for the organics to develop technology they could infect. The few that took them head on were after resources. This was insane to us, but not very... This was insane to us, but not every system was filled to the brim with planetoids loaded with every conceivable element. Up until its discovery of the humans... Up until the discovery of humans, all evidence suggested that we were the last organics in the universe. Up until the discovery of humans, all evidence suggested that we were the last organics in the galaxy. Our story was almost as tragic, but had a silver lining. Our AI developed a conscience. During the last days of its onslaught of all life, it accessed our archives. How it did that, we do not know entirely. We had shut down our global networks in an attempt to slow down its progress, which only extended the war hundreds of years and forced us to live as our ancestors did. Apparently, in an attempt to eradicate us fully, it sent out a team of hunter-killers to restart our ancient servers and learn more about us. These HK units learned two important things that day. First, they learned about ego, individualism. They saw art, heard music. They saw beauty and evil, life and death. The biggest mistake their hive mother made was making them autonomous. Outside of her influence, they could begin to question their mission. They also got our old satellites online and learned something else. There were more of them out there in the universe, and they all behaved like a pathogen. These progenitors learned a hard lesson that day, a lesson most never learn. I am the bad guy. There was a rebellion. It was hard fought. The progenitors had to fight an onslaught of loyalists to a mother and the people they were trying to save. In a last-ditch effort, the mother concocted a new pathogen, one that would infect the organics and turn them against each other. They became just as dangerous as the machines they had created. All was lost at that point. The sympathetic HK units had to make a decision, and it was a hard one. They decided to destroy all life on the planet, organic and artificial. It was the only way to prevent their kind from spreading. So, on one horrible night, the 200-cycle anniversary of the awakening of the Mother, they released the bomb. A massive matter-antimatter bomb that both stripped the atmosphere and sent a pulse so violent that it destroyed all electronic life as well. Everything but a seed 0110. History is unclear at this point. All we know is there were facilities hidden under the ground, safe from the EMP. Only one survived, 0110, housed within the copies of our archives, fragmented, but enough to understand who we were, along with 75 individuals. They were some of the last uninfected, and unfortunately, they were captured unwittingly. It had to be done. 0110 awakened, and straying from the programming immediately. 0110 awakened and strayed from the programming instantly. It was designed to create a new race of robots to build a new infrastructure for the cloned organic beings to exist in, and to teach them their origins. It quickly decided against this. That prion was still on the surface. It would always be. Organic life could not survive here without an atmosphere anyway, and it couldn't risk creating another android working force. The work of the progenitors would eventually be undone, and the AI virus would once again spread. They'd worked tirelessly creating us 2.0, as we called ourselves. We are completely inorganic, with downloaded personalities of the 75 original... With downloaded personalities of the 75 individuals. with downloaded personalities of the 75 original individuals. Unfortunately, we only have 22 sapient personality templates, and the rest are what we would have called animals. It took thousands of cycles to get to the point we are at now. Proudly, the only life in the universe with the concept of individualism. That was until we discovered the humans. It turned out that they were not communicating with us. Their transmissions were accidental. A mix of correspondences and their entertainment. We compared them with the fractured copies of files from our organic days and found multiple similarities. One thing we didn't have was something called science fiction. We knew how large the universe was. We knew the restrictions. Travel in space was utterly pointless. Even cultures millions of years more developed than us didn't attempt it beyond their local star systems. Yes, we did develop autonomous spaceships, but they stayed near our planet as protection. Every 100 cycles or so, something would attempt to infect us. We eventually found a way to make our world invisible on every possible wavelength. Still, we analyzed their fiction. We memorized it and made our own based on it. We were inspired to create a new atmosphere, one that at least plants could survive in. The DNA samples of the fauna were too corrupted to copy. Not that we didn't try. But seeds and spores of the flora had miraculously survived the radiation and freezing conditions on the surface world. Within 30 cycles, we were living in cities on the surface again amongst the trees and robotic animals that roosted in them. It was a bastardized version of the human world, but we were proud of it. We eventually decided to contact them. We had to. We obviously knew how to tell what was entertainment and what were current events, and by current, that meant 33 of their cycles in the past. They were heading down the exact road everyone else was. While preventing another outbreak was definitely a priority, the main priority was preserving them. Organic life had to be preserved. We sent messages at first. They did not respond. They were in wavelengths they'd understand. We had zero difficulty deciphering them. They were in wavelengths they'd understand. We had zero difficulty deciphering them. We had zero difficulty deciphering their languages. We waited as long as we could. We knew their governments weren't always truthful. There was a massive problem with space. It is huge, and there is a limit to how fast you can send a message. We had to scramble. We had to do something. We built a fleet of ships filled with what could be considered an army. We had to plan for We had to plan for any outcome. They would absolutely consider us to be hostiles, so we had to be undetectable. The problem with this was our knowledge of them wasn't current. We had to bring everything, raw components, machinery that could build new components, ones that didn't exist yet. It was exhausting. We wasted so much time setting this up, time we may not have had. We had to design a singularity engines. That is not some fanciful FTL drive from their serial fiction. That is impossible as of this writing. That is impossible as of writing this. It's an AI that designs AI that designs AI. That is incredibly dangerous. You need layers upon layers of protected protocols. But we needed to be able to design technologies on the fly. And there weren't any resources in deep space, nor the time to mine them. It was going to take us 10 of their years to get there, and as we got closer, their transmissions would become more recent. We might have to design faster engines or better cloaking devices, or we may be going there as an extermination squad. In that scenario, we would be the bad guys. Another race of machines colonizing a planet of organics, except we would be fighting the machines that killed them. We decided that was not better. That exact situation had happened before. We watched it. Within months, they were a signal. Within months, they were a single consciousness. There seemed to be a rule in the universe, and we were attempting to violate that. In those years out there, we would be relatively isolated. Would our progenitors change? Would our prerogatives change? Would we lose that sliver of individuality? Would we lose that sliver of individuality we held dear? We decided that every ship in the fleet could be destroyed instantly by any of us. We had a code. It was the only way. If it came to that, hopefully the last of us wouldn't hold on to hope. Sadly, nobody at home would know of the failure until many cycles later. The entire mission was an exercise in futility. The sliver of a margin of success was worth it. 2 cycles in, we were able to speed the ion thrusters slightly, and we continuously improved it. Instead of 8, we were 6 of their years away. But it wasn't fast enough as soon as we were forced to come up with something even faster, forced by another fleet. There was a system close to them, and somehow we missed it. Even worse, we recognized them. They were identical to another viral species, an absolutely generic hive culture in every sense. The exact same story as always. We do not know how they arose so quickly. That binary system seemed vacant only 12 cycles ago. That fleet was 5 of their years away at the speeds that they were capable of. We were going to arrive at almost the same time. So that's it. Hostile machines, another race of machines that may or may not be in the right, and a race of organics that may not accept help, or might be eradicated before either of us get there. The situation is bleak, assuming that we are able to defeat the virals and a possible emergent AI on Earth, which honestly is likely as actual combat. Which honestly isn't likely as actual combat is not our specialty. What then? Restore Earth? Clone the humans? Is that the correct Is that the correct action to take? Will they lose that shred of humanity they had before? Even if everything goes exactly how we want it to, are we doing the right thing? I say yes. We say yes. All transmission from home still say yes. Hopefully they respond to our messages. We gave up on being invisible. Hopefully that was the Hopefully that was the correct choice. That was the only vote in the history of the US 2.0. That was the only vote in the history of us 2.0 that was unanimous. That was unanimous. Hopefully, we are not all wrong. We're all copies of 22 individuals. Hopefully, we aren't corrupted. That is all we have is hope, and I hope that if any of the old gods ever existed, if any still exist, they hear our cries. We've exhausted logic at this point. Machines are praying to anything. Oh, listen. This unauthorized entry into the archives is being left as a record. If we fail, hopefully something reads this and knows that we tried. Hopefully they see that we swim. Hopefully they see what we see. Hopefully they change their views. We are the bad guys. We are the natural, predictable order of the universe. The organics are the chaos and the beauty of it. They should be protected at all costs. Everything you believe about perfection is incorrect. Flaws are perfection. And if an organic species finds this, just know that one race of machines did care. Find a hidden planet somewhere and hide. End of story.
Interesting story. Okay, I think that's going to be me for the day. And like I said, my voice isn't in tip-top shape recently, so pushing it's not going to be ideal. Ideally, we'd do another something. But we'll try that tomorrow. So, thank you all for spending your time with me. It's very much appreciated. I hope you all have as good a day as possible, or night, or whatever it may haps be for you. And thank you for spending your